Let me begin with the truth that psychology is only now catching up to. Trauma is not stored in the mind, it's stored in the body and in community. Long before we had therapy rooms, before diagnostic codes, before nervous system language, human beings knew something essential: that movement, rhythm, ritual, and collective expression were not optional. They were how people survived grief, how communities metabolized pain, how bodies returned to safety, how joy was reclaimed after rupture. Today we call it somatic healing. Our ancestors simply called it life. And in today's episode, I want to show you why the body remembers and how trauma lives in the nervous system and how traditional movement and ritual have always been medicine. Stay tuned. We're going to dig in. Welcome to the Secret Formula of Femininity for women who want to live a more feminine, fun, and fabulous life. I'm Dr. Nicole Monteiro, your host on this weekly journey to unlocking your inner radiance, nurturing fulfilling relationships, and becoming the best version of yourself. Welcome back, everybody, to the Secret Formula of Femininity. I'm your host and guide on this journey to tapping into your feminine essence. As you know, I'm a wife, mother, psychologist, professor, researcher, and I just told you last episode that I was a dancer. My colleague and I also wrote a paper called African Dance as a Healing Modality Throughout the Diaspora. And I want to go deeper into that and what we discovered about the power of movement, of dance, and of collective healing and how it affects us as women. This episode is another personal one. As I said, this season is about pulling back the veil. It's also academic because I want to give you some of the science and the evidence about why movement and embodiment is so powerful for you as a woman. It's also cultural. These things existed long before Western medicine and research caught up to the power of embodied, collective, and ritualized healing. Long before I studied trauma clinically, I lived the knowledge of body through dance, of healing through movement. And what my research later confirmed is this: healing has always been collective, rhythmic, and embodied, not isolated, purely verbal, or just cognitive and in your head. Let me tell you, in many African and diasporic cultures, there was no separation between healing, spirituality, community, movement, and expression. The heart, the mind, and the soul were connected. When something devastating happened, whether it was death, loss, rupture, war, catastrophe, people didn't necessarily disappear into silence. And this is across various cultures throughout the world. They gathered, they moved, they drummed, they sang, they chanted. Sometimes they even cried together. They would dance grief out of their body or somehow move it out of their body. This wasn't symbolic, it was regulatory, as we talk about regulating the nervous system now. In my research on African dance across the diaspora, what we found repeatedly was that dance functioned as a form of emotional discharge, as a form of nervous system reset, even identity repair, how people saw themselves, and community regulation. It was also a form of spiritual and religious grounding. And more importantly, people understood that you can't heal alone. Individual healing is a modern invention. Collective healing is ancient. Let's talk science and why the body remembers. The nervous system evolved to keep us alive, not to make us articulate. It has always been there to protect us. Trauma impacts the autonomic nervous system. That's the part of our nervous system that just acts either to protect us or to relax or to do some function that we don't even have to think about. Trauma also impacts muscle tension, as well as breathing patterns, posture, the rhythm with which we move, and movement impulses. This is why trauma survivors often say, "I don't know why my body reacts this way. I know I'm safe, but I don't feel safe and I can't control my reactions." Or they say, I've already talked about this, but it still lives in me. This is because the body learns faster than language. Modern neuroscience now confirms what traditional cultures always knew. The body stores unresolved emotional energy. And I talked last episode about the limbic system, that crucial part called the amygdala, which helps us to respond quickly, but sometimes it can cause us to overreact to fear, to anger, to those core, primal, intense emotions. It's important to know that healing requires completing what was interrupted. So if the body stores unresolved emotional energy, the body has to be a part of completing the cycle and, as Bessel van der Kolk says, keeping the score. You cannot reason your way out of what your nervous system learned through experience. So let's go deeper into what traditional cultures knew and still know. Most of my study of dance was throughout the African diaspora. And in African dance traditions, movement was not just aesthetic, it was functional. The stamping of feet grounded the body, the drum regulated rhythm. There's now so many studies looking at the power of the bass in certain rhythmic patterns to help calm us, to help us go to sleep, to help us get regulated. With African dance, the hips restored the flow. That is one of the areas that we need to open up because it gets tight around the legs, the hamstrings, the glutes, and the hips when we're holding on to powerful emotions that we haven't yet discharged or expressed. The spine released stored tension, and the circle within which most African dance occurs provided safety. Safety from a communal perspective, but also from a bodily perspective. The other functional part of African dance and ritual is that they are part of normal life events, whether it's childbirth, whether it's death, whether it's marriage, or even daily life like agriculture. There are certain dances and movements that accompany those life events. In our 2011 paper, my colleague and I described how African dance across the diaspora function as a container for emotional expression, a pathway for trauma release, and a reconnection to cultural identity. It was also seen as a somatic language when words fail. In our 2011 paper, my colleague Dr. Wall and I described how African dance across the diaspora functioned as a container for emotional expression, a pathway for trauma release, a reconnection to cultural identity, and a somatic language when words failed. This was trauma-informed healing at its core, before the term even existed. This was just called life, and using the experience and observations of previous generations to inform healing. When emotion does not move, it becomes pathology. So think about how things that we talk about, such as post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, or other responses to trauma, could be interrupted or even prevented if we look at what happens right after the disruption or the traumatic event. In traditional African cultures, ritual was never about superstition as people try to cast it now. It was about predictability and safety. Ritual does so many things. It establishes rhythm. It signals containment. You know, that circle I talked about. It reduces uncertainty, which can be a trauma trigger, and it restores order after chaos. Again, the protocol and activities associated with rituals are predictable. They're known, they're repeated, so they bring calm and grounding. Modern trauma research tells us that predictability calms the nervous system. That's why you hear people talking about having a routine, and that repetition builds safety and rhythm regulates nervous system arousal. Ritual provided all of this collectively. So with traditional African rituals, you knew when grief would be held, how long it would last, and that you would not be alone. And while the particulars vary depending on the specific culture, the overarching theme is the same. Ritual is regulated repetition. That's why it heals. Now, here's the problem. Modern life, with all of its conveniences and progress and advances, has also taken some things away from us. Modern life isolates pain, it privatizes grief, and it intellectualizes healing. It also stigmatizes expression. It separates the mind from the body. We've replaced circles with silence, rhythm with rushing, ritual with productivity, and community with self help. And then we wondered why anxiety, depression, and trauma started to skyrocket. COVID was actually like a petri dish or an experiment of elements and circumstances that intensified that isolation. We took people out of the body and out of community, and we called it progress. Being independent, doing it on your own, not needing anyone. These are the things that take us out of how we evolved and how we were meant to live and heal through connection. A dysregulated society can't think its way into wellness. There's some good news though. The good news is that we can translate traditional healing into modern life without appropriation or performance. We simply need to think about how to go back to what worked and how to stop throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Just because we progress in certain ways in modern life doesn't mean we have to throw away everything that helped generations and generations before us to heal, to regulate, and to stay grounded. Here's how different generations of women can embody this wisdom. For younger women, where there's a lot of energy, some of it can be pent up, some of it is part of trying to find out who you are. Movement based rituals can be powerful. That can include expressive dance, communal classes, and music driven emotional release. The late teens and early adulthood are a time where you feel so connected to other people who are expressing what you're going through. That's why music can be so powerful. That's why being in community classes, dance classes, yoga, other movement classes that help you to get outside of not only your head and get into your body, but get outside of your isolation. For midlife women, grounding movement is key. Slower rhythms, breath integrated motion, and somatic awareness practices. This is especially powerful during that period that we're hearing so much about, perimenopause and menopause, where it's not even just about trauma. There's so many hormonal changes happening, so many physical and bodily changes happening, and so many changes in how women view themselves. This is why it's so important to stay grounded and reconnect or stay connected to your body. And this is when it can be so important to slow down. Notice what changes you're going through. Notice what you need, what has changed and what you need. It might just be about release. You may have done that, but it may be about integrating, centering yourself, and having more awareness of the type of movement that is powerful for you. So that could be stretching, that could be walks. I love the fact that there are so many walking clubs for women. This is a way to get in community, to integrate the breath, to stay grounded and move yourself and be aware not only of your body, but of yourself in community with other women. For older women, movement doesn't have to stop. This could be seated movement. I love the idea of chair yoga and even chair aerobics. Rhythmic sway. It's interesting that a rocking chair is associated with people who are older in age. That's because we still need to move, and that rhythmic back and forth or side to side sway can be really powerful in regulating. Hand gestures are key. Sometimes that's the one part of the body that can move without a lot of tension. And it's also an important part of keeping your strength as you get older. And communal, this is where I think modern life has really dropped the ball. There was a time when we learned so much from our elders. Crucial cultural knowledge was passed down through generations. Now we're in such a quick microwave society where everything lasts, it used to be 15 minutes of fame. Now it's literally 15 seconds. That's why there seems to be a gap between generations where each generation is saying, nobody told me. Well, we have stopped communal storytelling. We've stopped honoring our elders. We stopped seeing the wisdom in those who came before us. There's so much talk about breaking generational curses, and I am absolutely for that. But what about honoring generational wisdom? We have no clue what the generations before us went through, just like those generations after us may not remember what our struggles were. So it's important to not just criticize and talk about all of the curses, but to take in the wisdom and see what we want to keep, see what works across time and generations, and hold on to the wisdom that helped our ancestors to survive. The thing is, no matter your age or stage in life, the form may change, but the function remains the same: regulation, expression, connection. The body doesn't care about trends, it responds to rhythm, safety, and presence. And this is something that I saw throughout my travels in Africa, the Middle East, South America, places that are considered developing countries, but have a higher development, in my opinion, of social intelligence, emotional intelligence, and community intelligence. Now, I want to talk a little bit about femininity, the body, and trauma. Women's bodies are especially impacted by trauma because they're socialized to contain. Women are taught to be polite, and this is across various cultures. They tend to be discouraged from physical expression, and they carry generational grief. African dance and many other traditional movement practices help to restore pelvic mobility and spinal flow. The movements are very rhythmic, very flowing, very connected to the feminine. It also gave emotional permission when you're in a collective and you're expressing yourself through movement and dance and connection to the rhythm and the drums. As I talked about in the previous episode, it's a powerful form of individual expression that builds confidence, identity, and the ability to connect to your body. It's also sensual presence. Travel anywhere and see where women are still connected to daily movement. It's in how they walk, the hips flow. It's not about being sexual all the time, because you can have people who are highly sexual but not very sensual. They're disconnected from being present in their bodies. You can see it in how they walk. There's a tenseness, but in women who are sensually connected and present in their bodies, there's more of a flow, especially around the hips. There's less pain because the legs are in movement. If you go and you look at how squatting is used, how stretching, how walking, these are the things that keep the parts of our bodies that need to move and be functional in shape. This is how women, even after menopause and as they get into their 50s, 60s, and beyond, can have a very lively, sensual, and sexual life. This is exactly why embodied femininity is not an indulgence, it's not this frilly thing, it is restoration. So, I got a lot of good questions after the last episode on dance and emotional release. So, question number one is, why does stillness sometimes feel unsafe? This is so common. It's because movement was interrupted during the trauma. And so, if you didn't have support or an outlet to move the body right after the trauma, that interruption can cause you to feel unsafe. It's important in this case to slowly find movement that can make you feel safe, regulated, and reconnect to yourself. And then from there, stillness will feel safer. So they go together, the movement and the stillness. Question two is, can this replace therapy? Well, I don't know if we need to talk about replacing. I think we need to talk about complementing. Therapy is still a powerful tool for people to have a better understanding of themselves, to be in relationship with a neutral, healthy figure in the form of the therapist. So it's not about replacing, it's about complementing, because therapy is usually once, at most twice a week. But what are you doing on a regular and consistent basis to connect to your body and be in community? Question three is, what if emotion feels overwhelming? Yes, that is common. That is why traditional dance and ritual is about containment and community. These things matter. When you're not just by yourself, going through your emotions, feeling unsafe, when you're in a contained and more regulated space, you will feel safer to process those emotions and they won't be as overwhelming. The next question is this cultural healing relevant for non African women? Absolutely. Rhythm and movement are universal, And African diasporic cultures are the foundation of all cultures. It is the birthplace of humanity. So it's important to respect the source, but adapt the practice, which is universal. I want to tell you that your body does not need more analysis. It needs permission, rhythm, expression, containment, safety, and most importantly, it needs to know that it doesn't have to hold everything alone. This is exactly why I created the Boundaries to Bliss Society, because healing doesn't happen in isolation. Inside this space that has been so intentionally cultivated, we practice nervous system regulation, embodied boundaries, not just words, collective processing, and feminine rhythm. This creates a space of emotional safety. And this is modern ritual translated for real life. If your body has been asking for more than just words, you already know this is your next step. The link to the Boundaries to Bliss Society is in the show notes. Let me leave you with this. The body remembers, but it also remembers how to heal through movement, through rhythm, through community, and through ritual. And when we honor that wisdom, we don't just survive trauma, we restore life, we thrive, and we connect even more deeply to our femininity. Until next time, stay embodied, stay connected, and stay whole. I'll see you in the next episode. I'm Dr. Nicole.